So my time to ask questions, and I actually have, uh, it's not one question, but it's a topic I came across on your website where you talk about your own sensitivity.
Mm-hmm.
And you talk about it both in this way of things breaking you open,
Mm-hmm.
but also that being kind of the door of life to enter in a way. And I'm just really curious how you experience this sensitivity in your life, in yourself.
Uh, I think being highly sensitive has felt like being broken open because I didn't understand what sensitivity was or what the worth of it was for a long time. Living in a culture in Canada that doesn't like sensitive people, the phrase "you're too sensitive, stop taking things on, stop taking it so personally," um, as a criticism felt like the theme around sensitivity rather than a valuing of, oh, you're feeling or sensing something that we don't, tell me more. And feeling broken open also came from not understanding how to take care of myself and hold all the sensing, all the feeling without being overwhelmed by it. And it's also the doorway into feeling so deeply connected, right? So having experiences of touching a tree or a rose bush and feeling into the entire root system and kind of soul of the or spirit of the plant, of going into a room and feeling the emotional tone or feeling the states of people. And then the breaking open part again of not knowing that it's not me, of wondering why was I in such a great mood and now I'm suddenly so distressed. What's wrong with me? Taking it on instead of understanding that the sensing is of another's experience outside of me. And learning how to actually be grounded and maintain my own sense of myself while also feeling someone else's state was a long learning process that I didn't get to until I would say my 30s.
I actually liked the moment where you said, where you talked about sensitivity as, oh, what do you sense? And that basically sensitivity is the amount of what am I sensing, what are you sensing, and what are the implications that amount of data that comes in
Mm-hmm.
has on us. I'm curious, how do you experience that sensitivity now in your life? Because you kind of talked about the journey. How is it?
Mm-hmm.
How is it now?
Oh, well, I have a great example. So in these pandemic times, of course, my daughter and I have mostly been hunkered down in our apartment. We've been going for walks every day, mostly in nature. And it's been super grounding for me because I'm not overstimulated, although certainly if I spend too much time on the internet, I am. But yesterday we had a big adventure plan. So we needed to get groceries like staples. I don't know if you've heard of Costco. I don't know if Costco exists where you are, but it's
I know what Costco is.
yeah. So it's the kind of grocery store I don't like being in because it's huge. There's a lot of people. There's often for me, it feels like a very frantic energy of consuming and stocking up, but it's also very affordable because it's a membership model of a store. Um, and so we decided to go. This was like our first big outing since the pandemic started. My daughter was very excited. She's a real extrovert. And we decided to go to the store, and I could feel my state shifting as we got into the lineup, and then we got into the the enormous warehouse building with all the fluorescent lights and all the people and all the face masks. And I just felt this really intense, very uncomfortable fog, like almost like a duvet about a foot thick all around my head and my neck, and a headache building, and just a very sort of panicky feeling of, oh, I have to get out of here. Like if I hadn't been shopping with my daughter and we had a list of useful things to buy, like olive oil, etc., I would have bolted out there as quick as I went in because it's such an uncomfortable feeling. So, but knowing myself a little better, I was like, you know what? I bet this is going to dissipate once we leave the store. All I have to do is just wait till we leave the store. It's not me. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm not having some strange reaction. I'm just feeling the vibe of the experience of people in this place shopping. And sure enough, we left and the headache had also developed and took about 10-15 minutes. And the fog just kind of started stripping away all of those sensations, and the intensity of the feelings that were arising shifted.
So in this example, it's a lot about the question of how much of what you perceive, what you sense, do you take personal?
Yeah, and also, can I be with the discomfort of it, even if I'm not taking it personally? It doesn't feel good to be in that kind of space for me. But knowing that I'm not taking it personally, knowing that it's situational, can I just be in the uncomfortable state, know that I'm tuning into the state of the organization and the building and everyone in it, just be okay being uncomfortable, knowing it'll shift, rather than panicking and not doing the task that I set out to do because it feels uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. So it's a question of perspective and containment in a way. Can I contain it, and can I keep the perspective of?
Yeah, although I think it's more a containment of, can I contain my knowledge of myself as separate from the sensation and perspective that feels like it's intruding inside of me? Can I contain the me that I know is me, feel everything else, and just hold it at the edges of my container of myself, instead of having it go right into the core, which is what used to happen.
That you know as you, that you just pointed to your heart when you spoke of that. How is that different from whatever is coming in for you personally?
I think the difference is is going inward and tuning, especially my body, tuning into my body as the inner source of my sense of presence, and the differentiation of the other things that I'm picking up on coming towards me. So if I'm grounded in my inner self, it's easy to discern what is the outer world. If I'm not grounded in my inner self, it all feels like me, but out of my control.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm. That sounds tricky. Me, but out of my control. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is tricky.
Mm-hmm. Does this, it sounds like it's very much a somatic experience, this inner self. Like, does that have a specific quality when it's there for you?
That's an interesting question. I'm trying to tune in and find some words for it. it feels like the quality, it definitely feels like it's along my midline, along my spine. And it's the quality of swimming in choppy water, but going underwater and just finding a still point of floating and that feeling of calm, dense peace. Of course, these things change all the time, but right at the moment, that's my description for it.
And then I can also hear that comparison of calm, dense peace compared to it's all me, but out of my control. Like I can see how that's quite a different life experience.
Yeah, so knowing those two different states, I'm better at experiencing what I'm sensing around me without taking it on. Or
And
if I go into a forest or something like that, I do deliberately soak up all of the piece of the greater piece of being in a forest, for example, the external that I do want to take in, you know?
I was just about to ask about that. When you say you do intentionally soak that in, how do you do that?
Well, I don't live there anymore, but I used to live on Vancouver Island in BC, Canada, which is on the Pacific coast. It's known for these really incredible forests, just massive trees. And there was one particular forest I used to go to because I could just go onto these walking trails. It wasn't very busy, so there weren't a lot of people around. And I could just find a spot to walk through or sit. There was also a river and a creek, and I'd often sit under this little bridge at that junction. And I'd just sit and sit and sit and wait for this kind of settling of my thinking mind and this settling in my body. So the soaking up, going into natural spaces and old growth forests is just this unbelievable experience of feeling very small and surrounded by ancient beings. And it's it's like it's not an act of soaking up so much as it is an act of patient settling in order to be open enough to allow the natural world to, I guess, enter me like a sponge. It's very restorative and it was very calming for my thinking mind. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the description of you wait for your system to settle, and then something different can happen. And is that something you personally practice or cultivate, this settling? Or
Oh, well, I'm good at not doing it. We were resistance showing up. But I think it was more that little forest started to teach me how. Actually, someone took me on a walk there, and I just loved being in the trees and near the water so much. Just that particular spot, nothing else had really pulled me. That I started going by myself, and I just started noticing that after about 10, 15 minutes, my brain would start to calm, my joints would start to move with a little more ease. I'd start to slow down. And so I feel like by showing up, the forest was teaching me how to receive. It wasn't any sort of figuring it out act on my part.
It was more of an allowing.
Yeah, yeah.
That was 15 minutes. Thank you very much for answering my questions.
Oh, it's such a pleasure to have someone see something and go there. Thanks.
You have 15 minutes now. If there's something that you're currently thinking about, that's kind of the edge of where you can fully put things together,
Mm-hmm.
I would be
Yeah.
very curious to listen to you for another 15 minutes.
Okay. So the thing that is pulling at my attention right now is this wondering around self-doubt. And I have this kind of frustrated curiosity that I notice in myself that I've devoted time and attention to learning the things that I'm interested in and to creating this transformational process of memoir writing that's body-based, that uses fairy tales. Like I feel very good about the process I've created. And it's it's right on the edges, this curiosity and puzzlement that I can still have very intense waves of self-doubt rise up that cause me to question everything that I've built and to question all of my skills. And even with all of the kind of processes of self-healing and personal growth that I've taken on, that I've invested my time and energy in, to give myself skills to not only to teach others, but to support myself. What is it about this kind of self-doubt that can show up ready and able to destroy everything? That feels quite powerful. That, and I know it's not just me that can experience this, but my edge of questioning is around myself, is what is that? And how is it? And I'm almost past the point of trying to figure out how to fix it and banish it. But the frustration comes from, well, gee, this is really tedious. Here I go again into another circle of, my work is great, my work is terrible, no one will show up, everyone will hate it, I'll get a billion emails of how I've insulted and offended and destroyed everyone. Oh, no, no, that's just your self-doubt. Have faith and trust. Carry on.
So it seems like the self-doubt is not just doubting your abilities, but kind of having these horror scenarios of what could happen.
Oh, yeah, that it generates those for sure. So let me just pause for a moment. It's like this sort of this little presence that is always vibrating at a different rate than the rest of me, just waiting to pounce.
Pounds on what?
Well, now I am reminded of Eckhart Tolle's idea of the pain body. how it's waiting to be fed by some sort of little hook. So that concept, I think, is working really well right now. It's just waiting to pounce on some little thread of fuel. It's tedious. So it's tedious, and the edge of wondering is, is this just how it always is? Or is there some way to boot that little asshole out of here, you know?
So the options are, I have to accept this, or fuck off.
Yeah, but how do I effectively tell it to fuck off?
Okay, I see your question now.
Yeah.
Has it changed over time?
Well, I think it's lessened a lot. I used to exist in constant self-doubt all the time, just waiting to be found out. Now it isn't constant. So it's definitely lessened. But when it shows up, it's quite powerful. Yeah.
Yeah. I know I should only be, or in my own inner rule book, I should only be asking questions right now. But but I have a thought coming up, and I want to offer to share it with you, which is that in my perspective of the personality, we have very different parts, like that part that pounces out, for instance, and they react to different, let's call them triggers. And one of the triggers I actually find in myself and in quite a lot of clients is this fear of attack. So there seems to be in me really a fear that if I do something, I will be attacked. And I have different parts that come up thinking they need to save me before I'm attacked.
I think that's not quite it, but maybe a part. Oh shoot, what's the right word? Fear of being cast out. The attack leading to being cast out. So for me, the bigger fear is being totally ostracized and cast out of whatever circle or group. Or having said that, I haven't really been attacked, so I don't know how I would respond if I were really attacked through, of course, through words or criticisms. This is very interesting.
So being attacked and then cast out.
I'm trying to tune into something, but there's nothing there right now.
How is nothing?
Yeah, it's nice. Pretty nice.
If I look at your face, you actually seem quite happy right now.
Yeah. No big thoughts. Yeah.
So I imagine also no self-doubt right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm also happy to just sit here.
So the one thing not quite at the edge of my awareness right now is that I have to run to the bathroom. So seems appropriate for this section of your podcast. Can we pause your
we'll
recording?
just continue letting the time run.
I will be right back.
See you in a moment. So we're going to continue, huh? You still have 3 minutes and 20 seconds to continue your exploration.
Good Lord, this 15 minutes has felt like forever. Well, let me think. Let me feel. What else is chasing at the edge?
I also, I am personally intrigued also by the nothing, the pleasurable nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Is that still there?
Yeah, it is. It feels like the feeling of having eaten a really satisfying meal, being really full.
But not
over full, no. With eating a really satisfying meal accompanied by lovely conversation with whoever it is. Yeah.
That sounds rich.
It's a similar feeling to what I was describing about being in the forest and just hanging out in the forest until I feel the forest working on me to calm and settle.
Is that also similar to that inner self you were speaking about in the beginning?
Yeah. Yep. Well, it makes for a somewhat boring podcast conversation, but I sure feel good right now.
The point is, I make these conversations absolutely secondarily for people to listen to in the end. They are very primarily for the conversation itself. So sometimes shit is boring. It happens. But I enjoy it too. I enjoy sitting with you right now.
Oh, right.
I like the expression of, well, it sure does make for a boring podcast conversation. This is also one of those things that's really difficult to portray on video, because to me it actually seems like there is a genuine connection, at least for me right now. I have no idea if anybody watching this would feel similarly. I don't know.
Yeah, that's an experiment.
But at the same time, I don't care. That was your 15 minutes, by the way. They're up. You made it. So that means we have about half time. And
Great.
you have 15 minutes of asking me whatever you are interested in. That can be about my life, my work, my views, my whatever. Really what interests you.
I can indulge my curiosity.
As much as you dare.
Well, this is fun, and I wasn't quite sure what to ask, but it's just showed up because I also have a podcast, and it sounds like maybe our motivations for starting the podcast are similar, and I'm really curious if that's the case. So you talked about how we sound to the listener being the secondary intention, and the first intention being the actual conversation and connection. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, for me, it kind of had two places where it started. Like number one, I just love talking to people, but I've had it so often that I would set up a call with people and we would kind of talk, but kind of not. Like it would be this polite dancing around the bush kind of thing, because we don't know each other. So creating this clear setting where it's like, these are the rules. First we do this, then we do that. Then kind of, even though it's artificial, it seems to create more clarity that actually leads to deep conversations.
Yeah.
So that was kind of my primary one. And my secondary one was that I was getting bored by kind of cookie cutter conversations on many of the podcasts of like, here is my pitch. Oh, how interesting. Here is my pitch. Oh, great. Bye. I just don't like them.
I so agree with you. So you said something interesting, that you made these artificial rules around the conversation, which is something I did with my podcast as well. But I find that creating a structure and constraints often leads in creativity to a blossoming, and it gives enough clarity for people that they can relax into the meat of the conversation. And these kind of strange cookie cutter podcast conversations, even though the rules aren't articulated, the rules are there of being superficial and shallow, right? So it's still
I
a
think mostly
constraint.
being polite.
Yeah.
And in one way, it's not actually about the conversation, but it's about, I want to have my turn to say what's important to me, and you want to have your turn to say what's important to you, but it's not about me listening to you. And it's not about you listening to me.
So is that what was boring you most, was the lack of listening?
Yeah, that's why I call this thing listening from self. Like actually for me, it's about, at its core, about the art of listening.
Yeah. So what is the richest experience? I don't mean like a specific person, but in this new format for this podcast, how is it most satisfying you?
It's really different. So I find every single phase of the podcast satisfying in a unique way. In this time where I can just ask questions, I'm deeply curious about people, and I often hold my curiosity back because my curiosity is not always PC and not always nice and not always. So I had a conversation about, for instance, archetypes. and people talk about archetypes. And my real question is, how the fuck are you aware of archetypes? And I'm not meaning that as an insult or as a I don't believe in archetypes. I just want to know, how are you aware of archetypes? How do you feel them? How do you perceive them? Do you see them? How are you aware of them? And it's easy to understand that as a criticism, but it's
Oh,
really not.
yes. Yeah.
It's really, I want to figure out how you are aware of it, because I'm aware of these weird things. I would just never call them archetypes. So I'm just in the back of my mind, I'm like, is that the same thing?
Right. Yeah.
But the only way to find out is to ask questions. So I'm allowed to do that. And then I have people ask me questions because I actually like talking. I just never know what to talk about. So whenever people ask me questions, I'm like, yay, I can answer them.
Right. Aha. So you started a podcast where you're the host, where you get to be asked questions.
Also, yes. I created a world just like I wanted.
Yeah. Well, my self-serving part of asking you about your podcast is that although I started my podcast with a structure and intention to get deep into things I wanted to talk to people about that don't usually get talked about, I've become bored of my structure, and that's interesting as well. I've become bored of the way I set it up to be most fascinating. So I like that you've built in a section for being asked questions. That's pretty exciting to hear about.
Yeah, I find that, and I mean, that's not really a question, but I'll just comment on it.
Yeah, please comment.
It's really this sense of, through people asking me question, I can perceive myself from a different perspective. And through me asking people question, they can perceive themselves in a different way. And I also find that these different phases of the podcast, like me asking you about what I'm interested in, can give you a very different perspective than you talking about something you are interested in, but me still being there and listening and actually asking questions, so that even in listening, I can potentially further your thought or exploration. So I actually think that these different places are super helpful in a way.
Yeah. So I have discovered, because my podcast, which I've loved for a long time, even though I confessed to recently being bored of it, I've discovered that not everyone is willing to have a deep and honest conversation, even if they seem like they might be. And I'm curious if you are having that experience, or if you invite people on and somehow are not able to go deep enough.
I mean, then that's the question of what is deep enough. I'm not sure on that.
Or if you can shift below the surface of identity based on what you do and what your interests are, and have this kind of honest rapport of considering each other's questions and answering.
So that's part of the reason why I start with asking the questions I'm interested in, and I context it as I can ask whatever question I want. So that's an icebreaker.
Right.
It's through that I can see what do people react to, how do people answer. I've had people with whom I've been a lot stricter than, for instance, with you, like, no, that's not what I was interested in. I asked about that. And I would insistently ask about one point a couple of times, because that's the point I was interested in. And my sense was that allowed me to deepen the connection. So through that, I can get a pretty good feel for what the conversation is like. And at the same time, I do think that with each person, the conversation is different, and that different people have different kind of mannerisms that they are identified with, or more or less. So I think certain people are so used to feeling themselves a certain way that to actually let go of that would be scary as hell. And then the conversation will not go certain places. And I'm okay with that. Like, I'm not here to deconstruct people's identities. That's not my idea here. But I am interested in like pushing against it a little bit to see what happens. And if I see, oh, that's off limits, then I'm also okay with that.
What are you getting the most pleasure from your podcast right so far?
From this one, or in general?
No, in general.
There have been two main experiences. One is that I had the feeling of each time I've talked to somebody, I walked out like getting a I don't get to know the whole person, but it's like I have a certain slice of them that I actually get to know quite deeply. Like a birthday cake where I actually cut through the cake in one, and I get like this thin slice, but I have all the layers in that. And that's been very, very rewarding for me, having those slices of people I can take with me in the sense of recognition. And the second one is actually, I've found it that all the topics I've taken in here to talk about, also just because they're on the edge of my thinking and I don't yet have clear words for them, it has every time it's really helped me to just come in here with something. And then sometimes it was a really personal exploration, and sometimes it was a very content-based exploration, but it really helped me further my thinking. And I find that incredibly fulfilling.
Furthering your thinking, what does that mean for you?
So I have these topics I think about, and I think there are different people think incredibly different. So there are some people who ponder, some people who move things in the back of their mind for years and years. For me, I usually think about things, so I'm interested in one thing, but rather than sticking to this one thing, which I'm absolutely incapable of, I will jump to all sorts of different topics that are connected to it, and I'll constantly rotate around it. But in the end, it's about this thing. And usually I have these, I can talk quite eloquently about something until here. And it gets all wobbly and mumbled and unclear after that. So that's kind of like my sense is this is the edge of I can really articulate until here, and then it gets I don't even know. And furthering my thinking is I can suddenly express something I couldn't express before. And sometimes I'm very conscious of there's something here, but I don't know what yet. And sometimes it's more like I'm circling that, and then there will be a time when it's like, ah.
The way that you describe and use your hand gestures around your thinking process makes it feel less thinky and more sensory and physical.
I think it very much is, at least for me. I actually would assume it's for everybody, like at least if we believe like neuroscience and shit, and then it's very sensory for everybody. But my thinking, at least the way I perceive it, is very spatial. So I have certain things at certain places, and I sometimes shift things around, and yeah, it's very spatial. It's also when I work with people, I have the sense of things moving in space, both in me and in them. I'm aware of these moves. I have very few words for that, but that's why yeah.
And I want to highlight, just because this is an audio podcast, how vividly you're illustrating with your hands all of this spatial thinking style, because you just said you have very few words for that process, but your gestures are telling me everything. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there is also a video of this podcast, but for the audio listeners,
Okay.
I extend my right hand into space and I turn it. And yeah.
I didn't realize there was video as well, but yeah, you're very, very gestural describing your thinking process.
That's one of the criticisms I do get for the videos I'm making, is I'm using my hands too much.
Oh, no.
No, it's just...
I'll counteract that criticism. I love it.
I can't do it without that, but
yeah.
But it is one of the criticisms I get regularly, is that especially people who come from a very professional background, they think I'm using my hands too much, and I'm always like, how is that even possible?
Yeah, well, I also, when I'm really trying to see, I'm starting there, but using my hands, and I think there's value to it. So I'll just add a little counterbalance to the criticism. And isn't that interesting about what professional body language is considered to be a function of shutting every single natural impulse towards expression down? So
that was 15 minutes again.
Felt like an hour in a good way, like just very rich.
So I have 15 minutes now to talk about whatever I want to talk about. And so you please feel free to ask me questions. I really benefit from that, because I can think much more clearly if I get questions. And the thing I want to talk about today, and I'm very curious, because the last 3 times I've talked about things, I've always ended at really personal points. I'm not sure that's going to happen today, but maybe it will. I've been researching the unconscious in a scientific way very much these past weeks, and it's been something that I've been looking into for years now, trying to understand the unconscious from a modern kind of cognitive science perspective.
So how do you do that research in a scientific way?
So I'm not like a research scientist, but I read books about it, and I look at the research, and I try to connect it to the experiences I have with it. But the thing I am super fascinated by is this. Did that answer your question, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay. The thing I'm really fascinated by is this understanding that I am getting more and more of. Our unconscious mind, number one, is fucking huge compared to the shit we are aware of consciously. And it includes so much of our body and our sensation and our feeling and all of that. But the deeper thing that I think I am so fascinated by and that I keep on getting a deeper appreciation for is that our whole system is constantly scanning our life and our environment and everything, and subconsciously adapting to make ourselves fit and survive and thrive in the best possible way. So that's kind of my interpretation of that's what our unconscious is doing. It's constantly going like, what are the rules here? Okay, I think I understand the rules. Okay, how can I adapt to that? And all of that going on without us even noticing. So, for instance, in business, these are the rules. You're not supposed to move while talking because then you're professional. I don't know why, but when you're in business, nobody has to tell you that because everybody just does it because their subconscious picks up on it and goes like, oh yeah, I'll do that too. But this thing I keep on thinking about is our subconscious learns things in order to adapt and to basically survive. But it also learns things that maybe in this situation we grew up in or we were in school in, we learned something that was beneficial, but actually it's absolutely not beneficial anymore. But we keep running on the same learning we've had 30 years ago because our subconscious is really stubborn at changing something once it's really implemented that strategy.
And so, do you have an example of that for yourself?
Tons, yes, but
then the question is, if you know, is it your subconscious anymore?
yes, because I can't just decide to change it because it
Oh,
goes on
okay.
anyways.
Right. Even though
But
you have some awareness, it goes
yes,
on. So by that definition, it's still in your subconscious.
yes, it's
Okay,
also,
interesting.
I mean, I imagine you know that, like you've kind of got an understanding of a certain pattern you have.
Oh, yes.
In my case, for instance, let's take a thing that you could call, I think in one way you could call it arrogance. I do have that, and especially in certain situations in which I feel insecure. The more insecure I feel, the more arrogant I get. The more I will elevate myself above others.
Mm-hmm.
I consciously know that I'm doing that. When I'm in that, I usually don't notice because it's happening without me choosing that. And even when I'm, for instance, in a new training or in a new course, and I notice, oh, I'm doing that again, it's not easy to stop. It's not like, okay, I'll stop being arrogant now and start putting myself above people. Like kind of telling my body to get out of it. Like that's not
Uh-huh.
how it works. But also I've seen that through being aware of it and through consciously kind of teaching myself new ways of being, that it slowly changes the pattern I'm running. So where I used to get a lot more, I am better than you in these new situations, it's less now, but it's still there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm just so fascinated by this, by the incredibly smooth way that these patterns just run.
Mm-hmm.
I'm incredibly fascinated by the fact that I have this conscious mind that thinks it's so powerful, but it's really not.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also fascinated by the fact that, and now I get what my actual question is. thank you. Thank you for listening to me rambling. Because, but I also then know that in sessions I've personally had and in sessions I've had with clients, there are these moments where I've made a new experience, an experience that's fundamentally different to anything I've made before. And it's like these experiences can shift years of unconscious strategies in one go. Whereas in other cases, even though I'm aware of what's going on, I can't change it. So there are sometimes these things that are so difficult to change, and then there are sometimes these moments where something so profound happens that it shifts the whole thing in one whoop.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm curious, like, how are these different, these two things?
So do you mean, how is it different, the interaction where the awareness is there but it doesn't shift, versus the interaction where the awareness is there and the poop happens?
Yeah, like how are these experiences so different? Where I have a new experience. Example, I was in a course. I was in my I am better than you pattern, but I had a personal session in that course in which I got in touch with the vulnerability below the I am better than you, and I could hold that vulnerability in a new way.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, the arrogance was still there, but it was so much less. And it's stayed like that since then.
Mm.
Whereas before, I was kind of consciously aware of it for years, but it shifted like a millimeter
Mm-hmm.
or maybe 10.
The word shame keeps popping into my head, so I'm wondering what role shame plays in bolstering up the immovability.
I mean, in my personal example, there was shame and there was like I'm not good enough underneath. I also know that there are examples where I don't think it has to be shame, but
Mm-hmm.
it's this underlying, um, the underlying emotional charge or the underlying stored burden that has such a powerful impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't have a, I'm feeling like there's something between those two states where one transforms and the other stays stuck, but I don't really have a question for it. But it's a really interesting inquiry that I've definitely wondered about as well.
And I think for me, this is a wonderful moment because um, I have that question clearer, because it's something I've been kind of dwelling on longer. I do even have I have an explanation in a different model that I could now just I could switch into that model, but I really want to understand it from this unconscious. Like maybe the unconscious really can have these moments where it realizes, oh, this whole thing I was doing was based on wrong information.
Mm-hmm.
Here is the correct information. Ta-da!
Yeah.
Maybe that happens.
Yeah. And I wonder too, maybe the unconscious just needs enough rounds of that loop of the self-witnessing and spinning through the loop, and then the timing is just right for it to go bump. I think that timing and sitting with things is potent as well, and easy to not I wonder if it's easy to not notice that something that seems miraculous and sudden is based on a lot of preparation in whatever form.
It's that old saying of luck is preparation plus timing, or something like that.
Or 20 years of hard work.
Yeah, that's
invisible hard work, right?
But when you said the word timing, what came up in me was grace. Because I do really think there are these, I used to do quite a lot of work in quite intense spiritual spaces where it was about like working with enlightenment states, and there definitely was an element of grace there. There was an element of people would be in a certain space where something like a profound opening could just happen, and two people are in that space and one person has an opening and one person doesn't. And there's absolutely no reasonable explanation to explain why one person has it and the other doesn't. Maybe there is something that we don't see or we're not aware of, but there seems to really be this grace, that sometimes grace is there and sometimes.
What does grace mean to you?
It's, for me, in certain moments, I feel like there's something bigger than me and way beyond my comprehension, present or moving through me. And hey.
A moment of grace right there.
Thank you, Google. Gracefully. But it's so I know it's sometimes where something's moving through me, where whatever I experience in those moments is so different to how I experience myself basically any other time, that I'm like, that's not me. Maybe it is. Maybe it's me not recognizing that that's me, but I would call that grace. And sometimes I have it, not that it's moving through me, but that something happens in a group or a field or a setting I'm in, where something shifts profoundly, and I have no explanation for it other than, oh, grace. Like something happened that's way outside of my understanding, and I call that grace. Google was telling us that 15 minutes are up, by the way.
I figured.
So that was the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. That was really a different and super enjoyable structure.
Yeah, thank you for being here and just being you.